20 dinners from the 1970s that you forgot about. Before fast food chains ruled the streets and microwaves hummed in every home, there was the 1970s dinner table, avocado green, Formica-topped, lit by the soft glow of a hanging globe lamp. It was an era of casseroles and canned shortcuts, of family TV trays and recipes clipped from magazines. The smell of onion soup mix and buttered noodles floated through suburban kitchens, mingling with the distant soundtrack of disco and the crackle of vinyl. It was a time when dinner wasn't just food. It was routine, ritual, and relief. Tonight, we are opening that time capsule and revisiting 20 dinners from the 1970s that you forgot about. The flavors of comfort, curiosity, and canned creativity that defined a decade of home-cooked nostalgia. 1. Tuna noodle casserole. It was the king of convenience, creamy, salty, and unapologetically beige. Cans of tuna, cream of mushroom soup, and egg noodles baked beneath a crown of crushed potato chips. Moms loved it because it stretched $1. Kids loved it because it tasted like a warm blanket. When it came bubbling out of the oven, steam clouding the glass, everyone knew dinner was ready. No frills, no flair, just comfort in a Pyrex dish. The sound of that glass lid lifting was enough to gather the whole family. The air filled with the rich scent of condensed soup and toasted crumbs. Every bite was soft, buttery, and nostalgic. The culinary hug of the decade. Sometimes peas were mixed in, sometimes not, but always there was love. For millions of American families, tuna casserole wasn't just dinner, it was a ritual of togetherness. Cheap, easy, and endlessly comforting. 2. Salisbury steak. Every grocery freezer held a TV tray with Salisbury steak printed on the box, a brown oval swimming in gravy beside corn and mashed potatoes. But homemade versions were a working man's feast, ground beef patties seared and smothered in onion gravy until glossy and rich. Served with instant potatoes and canned peas, it turned an ordinary Tuesday into something that felt a little fancy, the 70s version of steak night. The sizzling sound from the skillet filled the air as that sweet aroma of onions and broth drifted through the house. It wasn't just dinner, it was theater, the kind that ended with everyone silent at the table, lost in flavor. The sauce soaked into everything, the meat, the potatoes, even the bread. The taste was pure nostalgia, hearty, humble, and heavy in the best way. Salisbury steak proved that, in the 70s, elegance could still come from a can. 3. Chicken a la king. A leftover from hotel menus that found new life in Tupperware kitchens. Chunks of chicken, pimentos, and mushrooms in a creamy white sauce, ladled over toast points or rice. It looked sophisticated, sounded French, and tasted like comfort food. Whether made from scratch or poured from a Campbell's can, chicken a la king made every housewife feel like she was serving royalty, even if dinner cost less than $2. The sauce shimmered as it hit the plate, rich and velvety, clinging to every grain of rice. The colors, red pimentos, pale chicken, cream sauce, looked like 70s wallpaper come to life. It wasn't exotic, but it pretended to be, and that was enough. When the fork met the first bite, you could taste the optimism of the decade, a time when luxury was just a can opener away. Simple, creamy, and quietly elegant, chicken a la king was the suburban dream in a dish. 4. Beef stroganoff. A holdover from 1960s dinner parties that refused to fade. Tender strips of beef simmered in sour cream sauce with onions and mushrooms, ladled over wide egg noodles. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, a scent that whispered luxury even when the beef was cheap. It was the dish that turned weeknights into occasions, proving you could travel to Moscow without ever leaving the suburbs. When the sauce thickened just right, smooth, glossy, and flecked with pepper, dinner felt like an event. Mothers in bell-bottoms and fathers in paisley ties sat down to something that felt continental. The noodles glistened beneath the weight of that creamy sauce, each bite tangy, savory, and deeply satisfying. Even the leftovers tasted like indulgence. It was a dish that made people feel worldly, even if the closest they'd ever been to Europe was watching James Bond on TV. 5. Ham and pineapple bake. Sweet met salty in one of the decade's boldest marriages. A slab of ham studded with cloves, ringed by pineapple slices, each center holding a maraschino cherry that glowed like stained glass. Baked until sticky and caramelized, it perfumed the house with brown sugar and nostalgia. On paper, it shouldn't have worked. On the plate, it absolutely did. 1970s glamour on a family budget. The glaze bubbled around the edges of the pan, dark and sugary, while the cherries turned the juice a faint shade of pink. It was a sight as retro as a lava lamp, shiny, symmetrical, and strangely elegant. Served with mashed sweet potatoes or rice, it became a centerpiece, not just a meal. In an age of potlucks and dinner parties, this dish was the star performer. Part main course, part decoration, and all heart. Every slice shimmered with sweetness, nostalgia, and the unmistakable glow of the 1970s table. 6. Meatloaf with ketchup glaze. If the 70s had a mascot, it might have been a loaf of meat. Ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, and onion soup mix, molded into a pan and slathered with a crimson glaze of ketchup and brown sugar. It baked for an hour while families argued over TV channels. When sliced, it released the scent of home, sweet, smoky, unmistakably familiar. A dinner that tasted the same in every ZIP code, and that was exactly the point. Each serving was a warm, saucy slice of comfort, best eaten with a mound of mashed potatoes and maybe a squirt more ketchup on the side. The top caramelized under the oven heat, sticky and glistening. There was nothing fancy about it, and that's why it mattered. Meatloaf wasn't about cuisine. It was about continuity. It was the edible glue that held families together between sitcoms and school nights, as dependable as the decade itself. 7. Hamburger helper. Introduced in 1971, it was the miracle of the modern pantry. 1 pound of beef and a box of possibility, powdered cheese, dehydrated pasta, and that bright red glove mascot made dinner fast, cheap, and filling. For working parents, it was liberation in 15 minutes. For kids, it was guilty pleasure. It tasted like salt, starch, and satisfaction, the flavor of convenience that defined a generation. The bubbling skillet was the soundtrack of suburban survival, steam, sizzling beef, and the faint hum of optimism. It wasn't gourmet, but it was guaranteed. Hamburger helper represented something new, a promise that dinner didn't have to take all night. In an era when moms were joining the workforce and microwaves were just arriving, it felt revolutionary. No one asked what was in it because it worked every time. Creamy, cheesy, and quick, it was the taste of progress in powdered form. 8. Swiss steak. A budget cut turned into Sunday comfort. Round steak pounded thin, dredged in flour, and braised slow in tomato gravy with onions and peppers until fork tender. Served with rice or mashed potatoes, it was the kind of meal that made cheap meat taste noble. Every grandmother had her own version, and every kitchen smelled of simmering patience. Swiss steak wasn't fancy, it was faithful. The sauce thickened to perfection, clinging to the meat like velvet, the tomatoes breaking down into something both sweet and smoky. It was the kind of dish that demanded time and paid it back in comfort. By the time it hit the plate, it felt like love ladled from a pot. This was the taste of the 70s before shortcuts took over, slow-cooked, hearty, and humble. A reminder that patience could turn even a tough-cut tender and an ordinary evening into something sacred. 9. Jell-O salad supper. In the 1970s, gelatin wasn't dessert. It was architecture. Lime Jell-O with shredded carrots, pineapple chunks, or celery bits, sometimes even tuna or cottage cheese suspended inside. It looked like stained glass and confused half the dinner guests, but no potluck table felt complete without it. Strange, wobbly, and weirdly beloved, it was the edible symbol of 70s creativity, proof that experimentation sometimes set firmly. The molds came in every shape imaginable: rings, domes, flowers, shimmering under fluorescent kitchen lights. Housewives proudly unveiled them like sculptures, their creations jiggling with pride. The first bite was always the same: hesitation, surprise, then laughter. Jell-O salad wasn't about taste, it was about personality. It represented an age when food could be fun, fearless, and slightly ridiculous. And though it's vanished from our tables, its pastel glow still lives in memory. A time when dinner sparkled, literally. 10 TV, dinner night. Every family had one night where nobody wanted to cook. The freezer door opened, and out came aluminum trays with divided compartments: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, corn, maybe a brownie. You peeled back the foil, popped it into the oven, and 30 minutes later ate your meal in front of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. It was futuristic, lazy, and perfectly American. Dinner and entertainment in one shining tray. The metallic smell of the oven mixed with the buttery steam rising from mashed potatoes. The brownie always overcooked at the edges but stayed gooey in the middle. A sweet accident everyone expected. Kids loved the independence. Parents loved the break. The clink of forks against foil trays was the sound of the 70s domestic revolution. No dishes, no fuss, just food and television. It was convenience culture at its most innocent, a bite-sized glimpse into the future of dining. 11. Quiche Lorraine. The 70s flirted with sophistication, and quiche was its signature wink: eggs, cream, bacon, and cheese baked in a golden crust, served warm with a side salad. It arrived from France by way of women's magazines, marketed as continental chic. Men joked that real men didn't eat quiche, but everyone secretly did. It was elegance made edible, brunch turned dinner, and proof that the suburbs could be stylish. Every forkful was a soft, buttery bite of the decade's ambition, light yet rich, humble yet glamorous. It was the meal you made when company came over, when you wanted to show you could pronounce Lorraine and still serve something your kids would eat. The scent of bacon and pastry mingled with the faint powder of tab, the soundtrack of AM radio, and the clink of glass salad bowls. Quiche wasn't just food, it was feminism in a pie crust, the taste of a world slowly modernizing, one bite at a time. 12. Liver and onions. A rite of passage for kids who'd rather have gone hungry. The smell hit first, sharp and metallic, tempered by caramelized onions sizzling in butter. Served hot from the skillet with a pile of mashed potatoes, it was a meal born from thrift and iron deficiency. Parents called it healthy, children called it punishment. Decades later, many still remember the taste and the courage it took to finish. Liver and onions wasn't a meal people loved, it was a meal people respected. The crack of the pan, the tang of the iron-rich meat. It was honest, unpretentious food from an era that valued nothing more than practicality. Moms served it proudly, dads praised it with a grunt, and kids stared it down like a dare. Yet in hindsight, it was a dish that taught lessons. about waste, work, and gratitude. It may have been tough to swallow, but so was life sometimes. The 70s didn't hide that truth. They fried it in butter and served it hot. 13. Shrimp scampi. A touch of luxury for the aspirational household. Butter, garlic, white wine, and lemon, ingredients that felt exotic in the age of margarine. Shrimp scampi shimmered in its skillet, the smell alone enough to feel fancy. Served over linguine or with crusty bread, it was the kind of dinner that made people open a bottle of wine just because. In a decade that prized convenience, this one felt like celebration. The sizzle of shrimp hitting hot butter turned every home into a restaurant, even if the nearest ocean was 1,000 miles away. Housewives in polyester dresses felt worldly as they garnished plates with parsley, imagining candlelight dinners in some distant city. It was indulgence without guilt, light enough to feel sophisticated, simple enough to manage between after-school carpools. Scampi proved that glamour could come from a skillet, not a reservation. In a world of casseroles and canned soups, it sparkled like a gold chain against polyester, loud, proud, and unforgettable. 14. Stuffed peppers. Bell peppers hollowed and filled with rice, beef, tomato sauce, and a sprinkle of cheese, baked until soft and bubbling. They came out of the oven like edible little gifts, colorful and comforting. It was a dinner that balanced health and heartiness, loved by mothers for its thrift and by kids for its melted cheese. The peppers might have come from the garden, the recipe from the back of a Campbell's can, but the feeling, that was pure home. The kitchen would smell of warmth and patience, sweet peppers roasting, tomato sauce thickening, and cheese melting into golden bubbles. When they hit the table, the family paused, admiring the bright reds and greens, like Christmas dinner without the formality. The first forkful released a rush of steam and nostalgia. Stuffed peppers were more than a meal. They were a message that even in an age of instant dinners, some traditions still took time, love, and a working oven. 15. Baked ziti. Before pasta night became routine, baked ziti was a weekend event. Tubes of pasta layered with tomato sauce, ricotta, mozzarella, and maybe a handful of sausage if payday had been good. The top browned and blistered under the broiler, sending out waves of oregano and garlic. Families dug in straight from the pan, laughter echoing over the table. It was Italian-American soul food, generous, messy, and endlessly shared. The Pyrex dish hit the center of the table with weight and ceremony. A red, molten mountain of cheese and love. The sauce bubbled at the corners, leaving little caramelized edges everyone fought over. No one cared about plates. Spoons and forks dove in straight from the dish. In every bite was the flavor of family, the joy of abundance, the illusion that life was simpler than it was. In the decade of disco lights and gas shortages, baked ziti was proof that joy could still come cheap and plentiful, layered with love, one bite at a time. 16. Chicken, cordon bleu. The fancy guest night dinner that looked harder than it was. Thin chicken breasts wrapped around ham and Swiss cheese, breaded, baked, and topped with cream sauce. It oozed luxury with every slice, golden crust giving way to molten filling. Housewives clipped the recipe from magazines and served it with pride, while husbands marveled that something so elegant came from a kitchen with shag carpeting. It was the 70s definition of class on a plate. The aroma was intoxicating. Butter, wine, and roasted chicken filling the air like an invitation to dine in Paris. But behind the sophistication was a distinctly American ingenuity, thrift disguised as refinement. The dish became a symbol of middle-class aspiration, a meal that whispered, "You've made it," even if it was just a house with a microwave and a mortgage. When sliced, the cheese stretched like applause. Chicken cordon bleu wasn't just dinner. It was the dream of elegance served in an age of convenience, plated in confidence and covered in cream. 17. Macaroni salad with Miracle Whip. No barbecue or block party was complete without a bowl of this creamy creation. Elbow macaroni, diced celery, hard-boiled eggs, and a dressing of Miracle Whip so tangy it could wake the dead. Chilled and served in a plastic bowl straight from the fridge, it paired with everything: burgers, ham, or fried chicken. Every aunt had her secret twist: pickle juice, mustard, or a pinch of paprika. It was summer in spoonfuls. 18. Sloppy Joe's ground beef simmered in sweet, tangy tomato sauce, spooned onto hamburger buns until they dripped down your wrists. Messy, cheap, and utterly satisfying. The packet mix from Manwich made it faster, but homemade versions were richer and smokier. Sloppy Joe's fed a crowd without complaint. You could taste the ketchup, the brown sugar, the weeknight ease. It was the flavor of family chaos, and no one minded the mess. 19. Pot roast with vegetables. The smell hit you before the door opened. Beef slow cooked all day with carrots, onions, and potatoes, bathing the house in comfort. The roast fell apart at the touch of a fork, the gravy thick and brown as memory itself. It was Sunday ritual, the reward for surviving another week. Families gathered, prayers were short, and plates were piled high. Pot roast wasn't trendy. It was timeless, and that's why it stayed. 20. Deviled eggs and meat platters. Technically more appetizer than dinner, but in the 70s, finger food was dinner. Deviled eggs dusted with paprika, ham rolls filled with cream cheese and pickles, cubes of cheddar skewered with toothpicks. Spread across the coffee table beside chips and dip, they fueled every bridge night and neighborhood get-together. It was casual entertaining before takeout and delivery. Friends, laughter, and food that disappeared faster than disco. The 1970s dinner table was a mosaic of flavors, part nostalgia, part innovation, and part canned improvisation. It was the decade when recipes traveled by word of mouth and magazine clippings, when presentation mattered less than the people sitting around the table. These dishes might feel dated now, relics of simpler kitchens and louder wallpaper, but their memory lingers in every family recipe box. They were the bridge between the home-cooked meals of the past and the fast-paced future that was coming. Because dinner in the 1970s wasn't just about eating, it was about gathering, surviving, and celebrating the small joys of an ordinary day. And maybe, just maybe, if you close your eyes tonight, you can still smell that onion soup mix, hear the clatter of Pyrex lids, and feel the warmth of a decade that believed the best meals didn't come from restaurants, they came from home.